today's topic is actually selling stigmatized properties. So Eric and I chatted, I guess it was last week, and we both had some pretty unique experiences, as probably, many agents have, or investors, right? When you're looking at properties that you want to lock up as an investor, there's, some things that we see that are pretty gnarly. I specifically remember even in New Jersey, which is where I started flipping. One of the first few flips I've done, I remember walking into a haunted house, opening up the door, and then I had to like literally step up like 3 feet because there was so much stuff everywhere. It was like maybe not 3 feet, but it was like a 2 feet high. Like it was ridiculous. And then there was just bugs and flies and, everywhere. It was the most disgusting thing I've ever seen. And we literally walked on top of the garbage everywhere. I remember walking into the bathroom and we didn't see the tub. It was completely covered. Like all the stuff was literally even with the toilet covering the tub. And literally a person lived there not too, long ago, from when we saw it. And it was just heartbreaking to know that on top of it. It's like, we did buy that property, and I don't know, I forget how many dumpsters we went through, but that one was the easy one, right? Because you can clean all that out. There's no stigma really with it. When you go to, put it on a market, it looks beautiful. People don't even know that it was, in that condition, and it's not something you need to disclose, right? Because it's nothing. It's just a bunch of garbage, right? Now, on the flip side, the things that we're going to talk about today are things that you do have to disclose, and those things can, make things very challenging to sell as an agent, representing that type of a client. Or if you're the investor that ends up buying one of these properties, working with a realtor, it's not easy. So I have a pretty cool case study. So I don't know, Eric, do we want to start with mine, or do you want to go into yours first?
We can start with yours. I'm genuinely interested in yours, so I kind of want to hear about it because I haven't heard it. I've heard the beginning
Okay.
part. So
Okay, got it. All right, so let's start with mine. So here's the situation. So I'm gonna kind of tell you the story. So this was I have a team in San Diego. This was actually a friend of mine who worked for one of our sister companies. Her father lost his brother. He lost his brother in a very unfortunate way. There was some trauma, I guess, maybe a heart attack. And this is the house that, it looks clean in this picture because they did a lot of work afterwards and cleaned it up. But bottom line, this was in Northern California in Chico. So they came, the friend of mine comes to me and says, hey, here's the situation. Randy, I trust you, right, with real estate. And my dad lost his brother. And what happened is that they found the brother in the house, but the issue is that the brother was found weeks after he passed. So his body basically decomposed in the property. And they were like, how do we even, sell something like this? Because they were like, it's already been cleaned up because it's been maybe 7 months or so since that happened. So they already got it cleaned up and everything, professionally with the right company and all that. But she's like, we're getting ready to like put this thing on the market. We want to work with you, but we're just like so concerned on how do we sell this? How does this gonna work? I was like, wow, this is a new one. I haven't had one of these yet. So anyway, so we, first I wanted to see the report, and I'll show you the report. And it's not pretty in terms of how it was written. Site was inspected by Sean from Chronic Disaster Services on the 2016 to discuss the damage that occurred to the residents. According to the insured, the date of discovery was July 16, 2017. The source origin of the loss was the deceased owner of the home. In our professional opinion, the loss occurred approximately 2 to 4 weeks prior to discovery. This loss will take approximately 20 days to mitigate. room damaged, entire home in one form or another. Description of damages, provide a description of damage which needs to include whether secondary damages in the home. Carpet and padding will need to be removed. Majority of structure will need a top-down cleaning. Tile flooring will need disinfecting and deep clean. Blinds will need to be removed and disposed of. Duct cleaning and deodorization. Deodorization will also be needed. Where building materials removed, carpet padding and blinds. And then they talk about the equipment that they're going to use to get the stench out and everything, right? So this, I saw this, I was like, oh man, I have to disclose this now. Like, I have no choice. Like, this is what happened. It was sad and challenging at the same time. So this is back in 2018 when I ended up selling this property. So I had to go through my files earlier when I was putting this together. But this is what I got from the brother, right, of the deceased brother. So we came up with a plan, right? I was like, all right, plan A, we get all we can in terms of an offer, like just, what it's worth. And maybe the death is not even a factor. But we want to be planning also for plan B, just in case. So plan B would be prepared to have the insurance company give the difference to the current new owners of the property, right? Because if we put the house on the market and we, receive offers, but then they keep canceling and it just keeps happening because of this stigma, then we're going to have to keep dropping the price, right? And sell it. We don't know what that price will be because it's such a subjective thing. Like, how does someone value, or devalue a death out of property, and even further that someone decomposed inside the house? Like, how do you come up with that number? Like, you can't just call an appraiser and be like, hey, what's that line item, right, on your appraisal for this? Like, doesn't exist. So anyway, now we tried. So I was like, okay. So I was like, we need to be prepared for the worst case scenario, right? If that happens. So I told them, like, we do need to get an appraisal and see how they would handle it. We need a biohazard report. And we knew that they have 1 year to file a secondary claim and their time was running out, right? So we needed to hurry to get this property on the market just to see how it's all going to unfold, right? Because we didn't really know. So we went into this sale very optimistic, of course, and hoping for the best. And we didn't actually take any money down. We didn't reduce the value because of it when we went on the market. We listed this property based on what the comps were telling us for every other house, right? So we took that approach on the front end, right? So for some of you that just joined, this is a property that I was hired to sell, where someone died and unfortunately was not found for weeks, 2 to 4 weeks, and the body just basically decomposed in the property. So this is the plan A, plan B, right? That we came up with. But then the second challenge to this is they really wanted me to handle the listing, but I'm in San Diego. The property is in Chico. And if you don't know anything about California, San Diego is in Southern California. Chico is in Northern California, very, very far away. I don't know anything about the market, right? Not a big deal. It's not too difficult to learn, look at comps up there and decide to, determine a value. However, I don't do it that way. I wanted to partner with someone on the ground, right? So when I sell properties that are not in my immediate market, I'll partner with another realtor, right? So that was another challenge that I had to overcome, because it's one thing me being just, handling everything and leading the way and having my own scripts and, talk about this in a way that I want to talk about it, right? But now I'm including another agent into the mix, right? So I interviewed like 5 agents, and then I picked Jacob, right? So once I got a few interested agents, and I would send them a very detailed email, like, hey, nice talking to you briefly today. So I, on the phone, I told them what the challenge was, but then I also told them about myself and the situation that I have a 6-month listing. that I'm gonna handle the negotiations, that I want you to take the leads, of course, but really I'm gonna take the wheel and I'm gonna give you 1% out of the 3% listing side, because that's what I had on it, 3% listing side, and I gave 1% to this agent. And I disclosed all of this upfront, that that's how I'm gonna handle it to the sellers of this property, and they didn't care. They wanted me involved, right, to handle this challenging situation. So after about, interviewing 5 different realtors, this one we settled on Jacob, right? So Jacob was okay with getting the 1%. That way he was my boots on the ground. It was his for sale sign. He entered it into the MLS because I didn't have access to the MLS up there and all that. He had to handle the paperwork aspect, right? But I was on the documents, so I can be the one negotiating and disclosing most of this stuff when it's, when the moment was right, right? And that was the challenge I'll get into in a moment. So here is our action steps overall, right? We wanted to get a report from an independent company regarding the biohazard, hopefully in our favor, where it wasn't so scary. Get appraisal to get discount amount of death in the house. How do we navigate the position, the house, the house in the best way? So I remember talking to car legal, just to see if there's anything different I need to do besides, later in California, you have to disclose if there was a death in the home within the last 3 years. So I just wanted to know, is there anything beyond that, right? So I talked to car legal, and then I had to kind of navigate in my own mind, like, how and when do we disclose the information? And I remember car legal said, like, that's up to you. You can do it beforehand, before you accept an offer. You can do it, after you accept an offer, but it just has to be disclosed with, as part of your disclosures. I'm like, all right. And then lastly, educate the agent. Since I was partnering with another agent, they need to be fully engaged with the story and be prepared, prepare them to overcome these objections. I gave them the script, because I understood that what they say matters in these situations that are very sensitive. And if there is a fill-in for the agent, they need to know the story as well. So I needed to know if that agent, Jacob, was having another agent do an open house or anything like that. I needed to know all of that information so I can prepare everybody for about the property. Now, the way I approached it is, like, I wanted those agents to know, but I didn't want them to talk about it unless someone brings it up, because as most of you might know, if you're an agent, that neighbors talk, right? So I didn't want these agents to be in the dark, right, if they're selling this property and find out during escrow, right? So I told them about it, but I also told them, don't openly disclose that. There's no reason to talk about it at an open house. So we chose not to talk about it until we actually went on the contract. That was our initial plan, right? If a neighbor came and said, hey, did you hear what happened here? They were prepared to handle that conversation, right? That's all that mattered. So we did get a certificate of satisfaction from the company that did the clean out, to just, satisfy whoever is going to end up looking at this property to buy. So they're comfortable knowing that everything was done, to par, above par, and just cleaned. Everything is disinfected, and it was a professional company that did the mitigation of this house, right? So we
Hey,
got
Randy,
down. Yes.
that form, where did you get that form? Was that provided by the cleaning company?
Yeah, the cleaning company. Yep. So good news is we did get offers. We opened escrow pretty quick on the property. I remember getting multiple offers. So we kind of approached it as normal. We, countered without disclosing anything yet. Because my plan was like, you know what? Let's bid it up as if everything is, just even par, like it's the same, it's normal property with no issues. And I was like, let's see what people are willing to pay for it. And then once we disclose it, if we have to reduce the price, then we'll reduce the price, right? Once we accept an offer. So we accepted an offer. In this situation, we chose to open escrow, and before we sent the disclosure, I picked up the phone to the agent and I told the agent the story. I was like, hey, by the way, your clients are going to see some disclosures. Here's what they're going to see. And I explained the situation, and, and I try to, of course, talk it down like it's not this big of a deal. Everything is clean, blah, blah, blah. But, deep inside, I'm like, this sucks, right? So I try to just, be kind of even keel, calm, right? And focus on the positive side of it. Everything is beautiful. It's cleaned out. We have a certificate, blah, blah, blah. So she presents it. So this is September 20th. We open escrow. They get all the disclosures at some point. And then I emailed them on the next day. Oh, so this is Heather, the agent. Here are the disclosures that your client will receive with the other seller disclosures. I wanted you to see it first so you can bring this up in your own words, as these situations are never pleasant to talk about. One document is from the insurance company, which explains things in simpler form, and the other one is from the actual company that did the clean out, who probably went a bit overboard in their explanation to do additional things at the property and get paid for it. Of course, by the insurance company. That's how that always works. When a company knows that an insurance company is paying the bill. So I try to, explain that, they do go a little crazy, some of these companies, because they know that insurance is paying, which is true in most cases. Regardless, all the work was done with an above and beyond approach, and the clean out company issued a certificate of satisfaction, which is attached here as well. So this is September 21st, 2018. September 26th, cancellation. And the agent had Randy, my clients never read the report on the cleanup. We met Monday morning to write our repair request, but when I told them the body had been in the home for 2 weeks, they were ready to cancel. I did, however, tell them that the cleanup was extensive. I had the report printed out for them to review, but they were ready to cancel and move on. If it will help your client, I can write death on property for the reason. At this point, I would like to move on and be done with this. It's an unfortunate event that occurred for your client, but is a deal breaker along with the needed repairs on the property. So I was like, bummer, man. I was like, well, we'll see how it turns out, how it goes with the other offers, because we had backup offers, right? So then I went to the backup offers. Again, didn't tell them about the situation yet, but I changed my strategy slightly. I said, okay, now what we're going to do, we're going to pick the next offer. And before we open escrow, I'm going to tell the agent first so they can talk to the client, and I'm going to provide them the documentation and the disclosures of this situation. So we don't waste opening escrow and wasting a week. So that's what we did. We agreed with another offer that was in backup position to go under contract. And I called the agent and I basically had the same conversation, but I sent that agent the reports before we open escrow. And in miraculous way, this agent talked to their client, literally, like I remember it was pretty fast. And they're like, oh yeah, they don't have any issues. They don't care. It's all good. I was shocked, to be honest, right? But bottom line, that was the slight change in strategy, is that we decided to disclose it right before we open escrow. So we got full price value for the property. There was literally no discount we had to give for this situation, which is rare, right? But I truly believe it's because kind of the way we approached it allowed us to do that, right? So I don't know if that's the best way, but other agents might have approached it differently, and they might have discounted and disclosed it up front. We chose it this way, and it worked out. Would it work out again? I don't know, but it worked out here, and they were really happy because they really got full value for the property, and there was literally no discount given for the death at the property, which they were prepared to submit to the insurance company if they had to, which, who knows how that would play out. So this was a really, really good ending from a horrible situation. And we ended up opening escrow, of course, and closing on the property. So there was no additional crazy stories after that. But Any questions on that? That's kind of how we handled it, but it was a doozy, man. This was an interesting one.
If you were to do that one again, do you think you would you think you'd go the same route that worked the second time? Do you think you'd disclose before escrow, but keep it where it's allow the showings to take place, allow people to fall in love with the property, and then
Yep.
from there you can kind of have the discussion?
Yeah, I would just do what I did the second time around. Yeah,
Yeah. I'm sure we'll talk a little bit about it on some other ones, but like the second way is the way that I have found the best approach for the stigma properties, which is let people do the showings. Because if you mention it right away, like if you mention there was a body
Yep.
or that somebody had died, people are nobody's gonna show it. Like it's immediately gonna be a no for 95% of people. But if they go to the property, you can't tell. There's nothing that's off. There's nothing that gives any like signs of that. They're gonna fall in love with the property, and then they're gonna think, okay, well, if we walked it and nobody could tell, like what's obviously it was clean. So I like that.
Now there is, I forget which group it is, like certain, if it's some group in Asia. I don't know if it's the Japanese or the Chinese or which ones, but there's a certain, and I don't even know if it's the whole country, but there is a certain group that would automatically not buy a property when they know there's a death in it.
Yeah.
It's just like against their like religion, let's call it. So that can happen too. Alex, do you know? You were gonna unmute yourself?
Yes, it's Indians and Chinese typically
But
don't want a house to do anything with death in the house.
Yeah. So that, don't let that turn you off in terms of like, oh my goodness, like no one's gonna buy it. Like, no, there's people that don't care. And case in point, we were able to do it
yeah,
and sold it. But you will get those people right out of the gate. Will just, and that's why I think that, doing it the way I did it the second time around is the better way, because you just don't waste the additional 5, 6, 7 days, right? Because you open escrow and then you get the disclosures to them a few days later. So we kind of wasted 5 days, right?
yeah,
Is just getting on a call. Congratulations, we're going with your offer. And by the way, I need to tell you something. And then
yeah,
that agent might be like, oh, my family is whatever, Chinese. No, like I
yeah,
already know. I'm like, okay, see you later. Next, I gotta call the next agent.
yeah. No, I think definitely that the second way is the best way I found with any of these, which is you're not being dishonest, you're just not mentioning it. And then it also is a good way to downplay it, because if you mention it right away, or like I'll see agents that like that's the first thing is they take the bad thing with the property and that's the first word in the description. And it's immediately for people like alarm bells where, if you kind of play it as like, homes are going to have stuff that happen, damage, deaths that happen inside of them. If you play it as like, hey, this is normal, it's nothing crazy. I think
Yeah.
it kind of gives that other party some confidence.
Yeah, kind of downplay it. And
Yeah.
I'll do the second one real quick because it's shorter. And it's not anything I need to show, so I'll just talk about it. So the second one I remember, and I tried to look for what property it was, because this was quite a while ago too, and I couldn't find it. But bottom line, investor comes to me to help them with selling their property that they were about to go on market with. And I do my regular thing, like one of the steps of analyzing the property and value and this and that is I Googled the address, right? And sure enough, I Googled this address and there was a whole like they were in this property was mentioned in the news, right? And I started reading, the article and all of that. And apparently there was a stabbing at this property. I don't remember now exactly who stabbed who and why. But bottom line, I kept digging deeper. And the good news that we found was that, yes, someone was stabbed at the property, but they didn't die at the property. They died in the hospital. And that kind of helped, right? Because now we technically didn't have to disclose the fact that someone passed away at the property, but we still had to mention, and that was kind of I guess we didn't have to, but we chose to, I remember. But again, we waited, same thing, to say that, right? With that one, but I do remember specifically when I remember, seeing these articles about it, I'm like, holy cow. And this investor who bought this property had no clue, right? Which is one of the things we tell all our investors, when you're about to buy a property, like just Google it, like Google the address. You never know, man. Like, so it's such a simple thing, and a lot of investors miss that step. Now, the chances of that happening, of course, are low, but man, that sucked, right? And I do think, if I remember correctly, there was a bit of we didn't get exactly what we wanted for that property. So it did have a bit of a negative stigma, and I did my best, but that did not help. And so just another reminder, if you're an agent working with investors, remind them, or you Google it like I did. If you're an investor listening to this, please, please, please Google every property you're about to buy. I don't care if you're wholesaling it or rehabbing it, right? Like, do your due diligence on it, because if we did, or in this case, this investor did, that doesn't mean he wouldn't necessarily not buy the property, but it's ground for a pretty significant discount, right? Because you then can easily negotiate, 20, 30, 40 grand less because of that negative stigma that's now attached to the property that may or may not impact you when you go to sell it, right? And how can a seller and the listing agent for that seller argue with you? That's a hard one to argue, right? Because it's all speculation, and who would not speculate that it's going to have a negative impact? Like, very few people. That's an easy argument to win when you're negotiating, right? But this investor didn't Google it and lost the chance, and now we were stuck selling this thing and trying to get full market value, and it was not easy. So so that's the second one. But Eric, I'm gonna hand the mic to you because you got some good ones between
Yeah.
Cincinnati and Florida. So go ahead.
Yeah, I'll start with Cincinnati. I've told this story before. I think it was actually an on market when we did our finding deals on market. But I had an investor that a lot of properties in Cincinnati, shouldn't say a lot, but the soil, there's movement, and there's a lot of hills in Cincinnati. So it's not uncommon to have structural issues with a home. And structural issues tend to be like an automatic no for buyers, just because they're expensive to fix. Usually you're going to do I-beams, you're going to do some sort of like trenching around the home. So if there's a mention of structural issues, it is a huge turnoff for buyers just in general in Cincinnati. So I was looking at homes on the market trying to find deals, and there was this property in Miamisburg, and it made mention that there were structural issues, but it was priced really well, and it had been on the market for 500 days. So I'm like, I'm interested now. So I knew the agent. I texted her and I said, hey, I see it's been on for 500 days. It said it's got structural issues. Like, I'm planning on taking a look. Is it even worth my time, or is like this structure crumbling? Like, what are we talking about foundation wise? And she's like, I can't really say anything. Go out there, take a look. Seller's motivated. Let me know. So texted it to my investor. He was like, hey, dude, I'm 10 minutes away. He was also licensed. He's like, I'm going to go walk it. He's like, I'll let you know if we're going to offer. So he goes and walks it, and he calls me. He's like, there's nothing wrong with the foundation or structure of this home. He's like, where they're getting water and there's foundation issues is actually the sump pump has a battery backup. And at one point, the power went out. It kicked off the sump pump, and the battery backup wasn't operating. So it was we looked it up. It was a high water table area. So having a sump pump was necessary, but there was nothing wrong with the foundation. It just was raining, and there was like 3 to 4 inches of water in the basement. So I called her, and it was an American Homes for Rent property. I said, what's how motivated are you? It was listed at 225. We offered 160. They countered back at 165. We accepted. He did water mitigation in the basement. He had somebody come out and spray for mold. He had the water removed. He fixed the sump pump. He put a new sump pump on there with a battery backup. And he also, he rerouted one of the pipes to the sump pump, and multiple offers on the home when we relisted it. And it sold for, I want to say 230, like 4. So sold for more than what it was originally listed. He got it for 165. Total turnaround time from the time he bought it to listed it was 1 week. So it was on the market for 500 days. And the first line was, structural issues, cannot be financed, must go cash.
Yeah.
So I think they had like maybe 5 showings in those 500 days. Because even investors in Cincinnati, they don't want to touch anything that's got foundational issues because it tends to carry over.
Because so you guys are kind of weak there in Cincinnati. Because in California, man, like we love crack slabs, right, Alex?
Yeah.
Earthquake, no problem.
Yeah.
We love crack slabs. That's like, I mean,
Well, and cracked slabs are common, like up there, just like with freezing and stuff. But like we have basements, and some of them are block, and then homes in
yeah,
Cincinnati are old enough where you've got stone foundation. So if you've
yeah.
got an 1800s property and it's stone foundation and there's movement, it can get like some of our foundation repairs can get 40 to 60 grand, depending on what's needed. So yeah, we're
I
definitely
guess
weak though.
the lesson there is on the flip side, right? When you know this agent created a negative stigma against the property when the issue wasn't that big, but it's probably due to her own and not maybe just the agent's laziness, but also the owners, right? Which is an investment fund. But
Yeah.
those investment funds usually trust the agents to kind of take the lead. I was an REO agent before
Yep.
in Jersey. So they trusted me to guide them on what inspection should be done. So I want to kind of put a little bit of blame on that agent for maybe
Yeah.
not guiding her own client on, you know, how do we paint this picture to not be as, you know, brutal like she did. And she kind of just, you know, was like, you know what, let me throw my hands in the air, just say it's structural because I'm no expert and call it
Yep.
a day. And
Yep. And
the company, no?
yep. I think there was some like negligence to it and then just not knowing. I will say though, like when we sold that property, people, because you can see the previous listings, like agents can. And I had agents that were like, well, you know, this said this had structural issues. Like, what's going on? We had a structural report done by a structural engineer. So, kind of talk about like getting rid of the
Yeah.
stigma. We got that done. And we are like, here's the structural engineer's report stating that this is as solid as it can possibly get foundation wise. Miamisburg is a high water table area and the sump pump wasn't operating and that's why you had moisture in the basement. So we kind of knew, like I probably fielded 20 phone calls of people being like, this is priced really well. What's going on? Why is it priced here? And I was like, look, he got a killer steal on it. Didn't have
Yeah.
to put too much into it. He wants to get it moving. So we did some prep work on that. So
Yeah, so that kind of brings up a good point too. So yes, anytime a property's on a MLS that your investor is buying, or you know, or your well, in this case, it's mainly for investors that would work, but and you know, it's been mentioned like structural damage, fire damage, and all that. You absolutely need to document everything, or your investor does. So we, the agents, can be prepared to handle that conversation. And I would actually lead with that when I'm talking to
yep,
agents. Say, you might have noticed this was on the market before, it had structural issues, like because if you go on offense, then it automatically shows that you're not trying to hide anything, right?
yeah,
So you want to be proactively actually mentioning it then, right? So you just squash that, right? So that way, when their own client finds out that like, oh my goodness, I found this property, it was on the market and it had this in the description, like, what are we buying? Like they're no more, they're not freaking out anymore because we told them about it, right?
yep,
So yeah, when we dealt with like slabs, like, you know, structural issues, crack slabs and all that, and, you know, in San Diego, like I remember like, and we always had to have a structural engineer, right? A letter
yep,
from them. We had pictures before, during, and after, right?
yep,
And a full-on report of the scope that we did, right? And then it's like a slam dunk. Like no one even like they couldn't argue. Like everything was done to par. Like it was beautiful, right? Everything was smooth from that standpoint. But the investors that don't do that, they have a really hard time selling those type of properties, even though it might be done well, but they didn't document it. Maybe their GC did it and they didn't have any experience in it, right? Or maybe they did, but they didn't document it. They didn't have an engineer come out, right? So it's like they have lack of documentation and then they're trying to sell it. That stigma is going to hurt them.
yeah, yeah. And that's documenting anything that, like, when it comes to even the, you know, person who was found in the home, like they documented it. You had every possible report you could get. I have found that like the more information you have, the better, because then you can provide it to them and then they can make an educated decision when you're trying to make a decision, like if you would have not done that and then just listened to the house and tried to have those conversations, people would have freaked. Like, is it cleaned up properly? Is it taken care of? Is this fixed for the future? So I think when you remove kind of those objections ahead of time,
Yeah.
then it's usually a solid situation. So that was an example we had in Cincy with foundations. Similar situation down here in Tampa. We have to deal with hurricanes, but we also have to deal with sinkholes. I don't think people know this, but Central Florida / Tampa is actually the most common occurrences of sinkholes in the entire United States because we're on limestone. So it's actually very common. I had buyers looking for properties up to 1.3 million, and they were looking at a specific area in Pinellas, which is by the beaches. And there was this home we walked. We probably looked at 10 by this time, and they walked in and they knew that, like, they were like, "This is the house. Like, we love it. It's everything we could possibly want." We continue to look through, and it was priced extremely well. It's priced at 900,000. And I called the agent and I said, "Hey, they love it. We're going to talk about it. I'll keep you posted." And went home. She didn't say anything about the sinkhole. Uh, Looked on the MLS, and I get a sinkhole disclosure that there was a sinkhole at the property. It wasn't known whether it was still active or not. It was like 25 years ago. So I sent it to my buyers. They were moving here from Maryland, so they weren't familiar with sinkholes. So they were leaning on my expertise. And I was like, "Look, it's a personal decision. I can't lead you one way or to another. Do some research." And then I called the agent. I'm like, "Hey, you didn't mention anything about the sinkhole. What do you got information wise on it?" And she's like, "Well, we don't really have anything. The only thing we have is the original report from 25 years ago." And I'm like, "Send that to me, please." And I was like, "Do you guys know if it's still active?" And she's like, "To the seller's best knowledge, not still active." So I'm like, "Okay." Sent it all to my buyers, all the information, relayed all the information. They loved the property, top five, ended up passing on it. And the reason being is because there wasn't any active inspections. Nothing had been documented or inspected on it in 25 years. There was too many unknowns to what the person who did the mitigation 25 years ago did not, like, basically it was just a one page, "Hey, everything looks good. To the best of our knowledge, everything's solid. This is what we did to remediate it." But there was no like mention of the size of the sinkhole, where it was located in the home, how it was taken care of. And I even called some of the agents that are down here that have always worked down here. And I was like, "Hey, feelings on sinkholes." And one of the agents was like, "Dude, 25 years ago, it was like a known thing that homeowners would call insurance, say there was a sinkhole, get some random company out, get an $80,000 payout, keep 70 of it, pay
No
the
way.
inspector 10,000 out, and there was never a sinkhole at the property." So to the best of my knowledge, I don't know if the property ever had a sinkhole, was generally ever remediated or anything. And the seller missed out on, I mean, my people would have easily offered. So we kept an eye on that and that thing. I think it went pending in like the low eights. So about
Now,
150,000 less.
now, is there anything like, so if you were the one representing that seller, right?
Yeah.
And there was legitimately a sinkhole 25 years ago that was repaired, or I don't know how they even, do that work, right? But
Yeah.
is there anything, I'm guessing there are companies out there that they can come
Mhm.
out and do a test and test the
Yeah.
soil, the firmness or whatever, and like, what
Yeah,
happened?
they'll do like a sonar inspection. They can test soil. They can check for movement in the house. There's no guarantee, but the more research I started to do into it, because I was familiar with sinkholes, but not on like the having a buyer purchase a sinkhole property. The more research I did on it, if she would have done it, and this was after my clients had already made the decision, was every site I could find was like, if a house had a sinkhole and it's been repaired, it's safer than any other home in the area because you don't know if there's another home in the area that's on a sinkhole that hasn't been mitigated. But if it's been mitigated, it's solid. Like they have to go through so much to truly mitigate those sinkholes
Got it.
that 90% of the time, if a sinkhole has been mitigated, it is better, it is safer than a house that hasn't because it's a known thing and it's been taken care of. There's homes in the Tampa area, up in Ellis, Pasco, and stuff like that that are on sinkholes, and you never know until the foundation shifts or it
Yeah.
falls in.
Yeah. Got
So
it.
I would
Okay.
have done if I was representing the seller, I would have had a company come out and have a like, what is your best guess? This is the report from 25 years ago. Do the sonar, check the soil, make sure there's no movement, provide a detailed report. I would also have a structural engineer come out, a structural engineer is just going to see if there's any movement or anything. So I'd get as
Yeah.
many reports as I can on that. And then I would also provide some links as to why a sinkhole repaired home tends to be safer than one that wasn't. I think if we had that from the beginning, my
Yeah.
buyers wouldn't have freaked out and panicked. And I think I could have provided that to them and said, this is what the seller provided. I think they would have bought it.
Yeah, got it. Yeah, and then on the, since you were representing the buyer, that's a big expense for the buyer to do all that research on their own.
Yep.
And most
Yeah, and
retail buyers are not going to do that. Like,
they were on the fence. So their thought was, if we come out of cost for all of that, we're already on the fence with this property because of the sinkhole. They were worried it was going to be a sunk cost fallacy. If all of those reports and information had been provided to us up front, I think they would have pulled the trigger. So I think that's like, and even bringing it back to your original one, I think that's why you let people go in and do the showing. And then as soon as they leave, I would almost just call and say, hey, here's the deal. If they're interested, this is the information I have. There was a previous sinkhole. Here's the reports. Here's why it's safer. Here's everything you can have.
well, I don't know. I would
And
wait. I would wait until they submit an offer and we bid it
see
up.
if, but I think if you do it before that, then it kind of, I mean, I guess I could wait till the offer, but if you do it beforehand, I think it just removes any sort of like, hey, we were kind of waiting for you to submit the offer. And you can just downplay it. Like, hey, there might or might not have been a sinkhole. Report from 25 years was very,
Yeah.
undetailed. We had a structural engineer come out. We had a company local that does sinkhole repairs and also inspections come out and give it a thumbs up. Like, I would almost just immediately provide that because it sat for so long, and I'd have to think, and
Uh,
that area stuff moves really quickly. I'd have to think as soon as people went on the MLS and saw the sinkhole stuff, they were out.
oh, got it, got it. Okay, that's fair. Okay. All right, and then the last one, you have hurricanes. Hurricane.
Yes.
Good
Yeah.
old
So
hurricanes.
I feel like Florida's got a lot of stigmatized property. So we've also got meth properties, which you want to stay clear of. But I haven't dealt with them personally, so I'm not gonna go into that. So hurricanes and flooding properties are like the common one right now. So we have a listing that is on a river that connects to the Gulf, and it was a referral from EXP. We talked to the seller. She was doing some repairs from a hurricane a year and a half ago. There was just enough storm surge where it got into the back room facing the house is like a Florida room, so almost no damage. But she was like, "Hey, we just decided to fix everything up, make it really nice, and get it listed." So we listed at 680 in June. It had an offer within the first week. The neighborhood moves really quickly, even for it being Tampa, and it appraised out in July at 680. Buyer backed out at the very end of July, beginning of August. They just got cold feet. And so we still had some interest on the property. There was still stuff going on. And even, my seller at the time was like, hey, I just want to sell before hurricane season, which our peak is like September, October.
Let me interject. Did you have to, like in Florida, do you have to disclose that there was that little flood back, let's say?
You used to not have to up until 3 months ago. But now you do. So there is a flood disclosure in Florida that literally just came out 3 or 4 months ago. And you're supposed to disclose whether there was a flood or if you did an insurance claim for a flood. Because in Florida, if a property floods multiple times, FEMA has the ability to not allow you to pull permits to do the repairs. Like, they can say it's a total loss. We're not going to allow you to pull permits. Like, the house has got to be torn down. So in prone flooding areas, that does happen. And even to kind of bring it into this as well, this one's another great example. There was a listing we had in Shore Acres in St. Pete. And this one was a $500,000 home, pool home, beautiful, one of the better parts of St. Pete. It's always been like very desirable. They've been hit with, I think this was their fourth flood. Helene was their fourth flood in 2 years. That seller called and was like, hey, I need to get this sold. We listed at 500. We worked all the way down to 350. We came down $150,000. we had the First Street property that me and you kind of talked about, you know, looking on market for deals. And I said, you know, this was a stigma of hold, like investors won't touch a property if it's on market for no reason. We were running an open house at that property and people were like, hey, we're looking in the area. And our listing was 5 minutes up the road. And I was like, well, we have a beautiful property in Shore Acres. It's $100,000 cheaper. It comes with a pool. And as soon as I mentioned Shore Acres, everybody was like, like not doing it. So that entire neighborhood has become so stigmatized, you can't sell a home because they've all flooded so often. And when I ran comps on that house, there was like 70 active listings in a quarter mile. So
Yeah.
that's
So
like,
did you sell that one or did it come off the market?
so she had a agent in the neighborhood reach out and say, hey, you need a local agent to sell the property, like that lives in the neighborhood that knows how to sell it. So I told her, I was like, this thing's been a stressful time for me anyways. So we released the listing, no problems. We had it for a couple months. Agent listed it. She actually listed at 400. That's where we ended at. Got flooded in Helene, sold for 240.
Oh man.
$160,000 less. And the agent that listed it, that was the neighborhood expert that could get it sold, had it for longer than we did. Less showings, no offers.
So
So
then, and then the one, circle back to the one you started with, you had it under contract,
yeah,
backed out, and then all the hurricanes come, so now it floods probably worse than
yep,
just the back patio or
yeah,
room. And then what
yeah.
happened?
That one got about a foot or two of water on the inside. It was a lot. It was a much larger storm surge. Like Helene was insane. So she remediated it. Like I said, it appraised in July at 680. We still had interest. We still had people wanting to get it, and she remediated or did kind of the cleanup and stuff. And we just listed it a couple weeks ago at 450. So $230,000 less. And go ahead.
But she submitted an insurance claim.
So on that one, she did. The first one, she didn't. The first one was like it was literally just there was a
Yeah.
floor. It's literally a Florida room. Like it's not even livable space. They got it. This
Yeah,
time
so
she did.
I guess what I'm trying to get at too is like, with floods, I mean, that's a tough one. Like it's very hard to overcome that stigma, right? And
Yeah.
so I think the best thing we can do as investors, just be mindful of that. And most of these, like Eric is saying, they or at least him and I were talking earlier, is that most of these end up just going for land value when
Yep.
they have so much negative stigma against it because of multiple floods, that they end up going for land value because the builders that are building new properties here, they raise it up where the garage is basically, you know, uh, is the only thing on the ground level, and the house
Yep.
is above it, and it's designed for water just to flow right through the garage, literally. Uh, so that's what they're doing, and that's what most people are gonna unfortunately have to do, right?
Yeah.
In this area, is that right, Eric?
Yeah. And I think we've even discussed it with, investors locally that have sent me properties that have flooded and they ask my opinion. They go, would you buy this? I wouldn't touch it with a 10-foot pole. Like any property that's flooded to me, especially the ones that flooded with Helene, because the damage by that one was just insane. If you're an investor, it's not worth it because they're going to go to list those properties, and it is going to be known that they flooded, that there was damage. So if you're planning on living there and you're less worried about it, or maybe it was Helene was a once in 100-year flood. Like that doesn't happen in
Yeah.
anywhere like that. So you can kind of give it a little bit of, grace for that. But if you're an investor, there's other properties you can go after. There's so much risk to taking on a flood property, including mold, permitting issues. The other thing is the FEMA 50/50 rule in Florida. So, these properties that flooded, you can only do 50% of the assessed value. So let's say the home's assessed at 240, which your tax assessed value is always lower. You can't put in more than 120,000 in repairs, or they'll consider it a tear down. They won't let you pull permits. And I know people that did it in Cape Coral when Ian hit in 2018, and they made that homes unsellable. Like they literally made them either like they just made them tear them down. It was complete losses.
Wow. Yeah. Interesting. Yeah, it's a different animal when it comes to hurricanes. And then and I lastly I'll finish on this is when I speak to agents, in Florida about hurricanes and how they went about selling it, a lot of them, it was kind of consensus. I noticed they would say, you know what, give it like 2 years and people forget. So it's
Yep.
like it's almost like the 2 year mark is like the magic number, right? Where people just forget. But it's also, if you go through, let's say, 2 additional hurricane seasons and there's no floods, then, some people kind of be like, all right, it's worth taking a risk. I'm going to have flood insurance. That storm was, once in 100 years. And look,
Yeah.
2 years, it's been fine. So more people are willing to take a chance, even if they remember what happened 2 years ago. But most don't. So
Yeah.
that's kind of the magic number. 2 years, they said. Agents selling in Florida with, after hurricanes.
And it's just like if you play it by the odds, like there's only so many like hurricanes the west coast of Florida gets hit by over 100 years. So if you play it by the odds, we've gotten hit by 4 in the past, 5 years. So like maybe for the next 100 years we don't have any. Like they tend to bunch up. So who knows? You never know.
Yeah.
Remain
Well, awesome.
optimistic.